Governor DeSantis destroys virtual learning. That's right, let's say it again. Governor DeSantis of Florida destroys virtual learning. What does that mean? It means that children across the country have been learning virtually via Zoom and other, of course, platforms in order to not go into classroom in person. And it has not been very successful, to say the least. Why? Because of COVID-19. They haven't been able to go to school because of COVID-19. But DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he has actually destroyed this whole idea of virtual learning and what it has done to our country, and most importantly, what it has done to our students and children. We have a clip on this. It's actually a number of clips. You won't believe it. It's really worth listening to. It's a terrific segment on this idea of virtual learning and how our country has really been affected by this. We have the first clip up, and here's DeSantis saying in a press conference just a couple of days ago, schools need to be open. We have that clip, and here it is.
We're here today to make, I think, an important announcement as we see schools, unfortunately, remain closed in key pockets of our country. Today's announcement doubles down on Florida's commitment to our students and to our parents. And the announcement is this: schools will remain open for in-person instruction, and we will continue to offer parents choices for the spring semester. And every parent in Florida can take that to the bank.
So DeSantis just said unequivocally that schools will be open. So as you can imagine, the press naturally is saying, well, what happens? What about virtual learning? Can you still do that? Can you still virtually learn if you don't want your child to go to school because you are so terrified that your child may get coronavirus or pass it on to you? DeSantis does a great job describing the science, and he has his staff there also talking about it in Florida at his press conference. So here's Governor DeSantis talking about what happens to virtual learning and what your options are. It's really terrific, and we have that clip, and here it is.
It continues the requirement that districts offer in-person learning and also contains the protections of school district funding. Now, there's one, I think, new addition, which I think is really important, and I think it was very well considered, and is this: parents must be notified if a student is struggling with virtual learning. Still providing the parent the option to do virtual learning if they want, but they need to be notified, and then the student must return to in-person instruction unless the parent affirmatively opts out and says they want to still remain virtual. And the reason why we're doing that is because the data and the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. The virtual learning is just not the same as being in person.
So no more gotcha, right, of elected officials, at least not in Florida. And here's what I mean by that. So you have a governor that's saying, first and foremost, schools are open, unequivocally they're open. But if you still want to learn virtually, if you want your children to continue to learn from home virtually and not go to school, that is your choice as a parent, and you need to take responsibility for the choice that you are making. And to make sure that we're going to hold you accountable instead of you blaming and finger pointing as to why your child isn't learning, which is certainly understandable. Look, podcast listeners, I can't learn online, all right? I'll just speak for myself. I have to be in a classroom. I've always been that way. So if I were in a situation, and I think many podcast listeners agree, if we're all in a situation where we're children and we're actually having to learn exclusively online, I'm sure we'd be falling behind entire grades, right? Entire semesters. It would be awful. So what Governor DeSantis is saying is look, we are going to notify you if your children are still learning online because you don't want to send them to school in person. Your kid's learning online. We're going to notify you as a parent if your child is falling behind and failing. We're going to let you know. And we're going to let you know very quickly what's happening, including if your child is not participating or showing up or playing games. The big thing with, of course, virtual learning is and let's face it, kids are professionals at this, is pretending that you're not really there by putting some sort of picture up or some sort of video up that shows that you're actually participating, but you're not actually present. And then instead, of course, playing, video games or what have you with your friends. But the fact of the matter is, this makes perfect sense because children are falling behind so much. So we have Governor DeSantis in the next clip talking about what has the result been of closing schools? What has the result been? And we have this clip. It's pretty terrific, and here it is.
And I would say that closing schools due to coronavirus is probably the biggest public health blunder in modern American history. The fallout in communities that are still chafing under school closures. We have some of the biggest school districts in our country that still do not have in-person instruction. Incidentally, of the top 10 school districts population-wise, 5 are in Florida. All 5 offer in-person instruction. But the harm from this is going to reverberate in those communities for years and years to come. And the tragedy of all this is that the evidence has been remarkably clear since the spring that closing schools offers virtually nothing in terms of virus mitigation, but imposes huge costs on our kids, on our parents, and on our society.
So he said it, right? And naturally, if you are any kind of elected official and you say things so clearly and concisely that closing schools has been the biggest blunder in American history because the science didn't follow closing the schools and still doesn't. And of course, we still have some of the largest school districts in the country that are still closed, including in my home state. What DeSantis is saying is that, it's not, you're going to just, what? You're going to go after me? You're going to complain? You're going to say, look, you're the governor. You want people to die. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, right? Because these elected officials, so many of them are incompetent. In DeSantis's case, I think he's incredibly trustworthy because he's using the science to open the schools, but he's not saying, hey, it's compulsory that you show up in person. You can also learn virtually if you want to. But we have these states, certain states with certain incredibly strong teachers unions that are saying, no, that's not fair. It's not fair that some people should be able to go to school in person and others have to stay home because they're concerned about the virus. No, it's a choice. It is a choice. So DeSantis is giving the citizens of his state the choice. And they have to take personal responsibility for the decision that they make. They meaning the parents, okay? They need to take personal responsibility for the fact that their children are either going in person, which is a choice, or staying at home, which is a choice. Makes perfect sense. It's uniquely American that we have these options, right? Especially during these really trying times, to say the least. So I got to give DeSantis great credit. We have the last clip in this series of good old Governor DeSantis destroys virtual learning, and that is he talks about Europe. And how Europe, of course, certainly very left of center, Europe of all places, do you know the schools really never closed? They didn't close in Europe. And yet we still are dealing with this issue here in America, which is fascinating, right? Fascinating that it takes a governor from Florida to just say it the way it is, give people the options, not buy into the nonsense from the teachers unions, and instead put the children and the parents first and put them in the driver's seat to do what? To choose. Free to choose, right? Very Milton Friedman-like, free to choose. So we have this last clip, and here it is.
Even as Europe has recently experienced a very, very sharp outbreak in countries like France, in Switzerland, and Belgium, closing schools was simply off the table as a viable response. Some, like France, chose to shut down businesses. Others, like Switzerland, didn't do that. No one was talking about closing schools. And I think that is reflective of what the evidence has shown us. So as we stand here today, people who advocate closing schools for virus mitigation are effectively today's flat earthers. They have no scientific or evidence support for their position.
I love that. They're today's flat earthers. That is perfect, right? Because we have this example in Europe and we can follow the data in Europe where they didn't close schools. Yes, maybe they closed certain businesses, maybe they closed certain sports arenas and so forth, but they didn't ever close the schools, really. Look, we have friends, my wife and I, they're in France, and he said the same thing. Hey, our kids are still going to school. And so we have this evidence that's there, and DeSantis doesn't even hesitate to say, yeah, so the people that are still saying that all schools need to be closed, they're like the flat earthers. And yet those flat earthers are the same ones that say, follow the science. Yeah, right. They're not following the science. They're following the teachers' unions. And that's it for Governor DeSantis destroys virtual learning.